Well, hello, I'm Josh and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And this is another great haunted house film for you. This one's starring George C. Scott and directed by Peter Medak. I'm of course talking about The Changeling. The Changeling follows music professor John Russell, who recently lost both his wife and his daughter in a tragic car accident. He is later convinced to rent an old mansion in Seattle to try and write some music as he recovers. However, before he can settle in, odd happenings begin to occur all around him, leading Russell to believe the home is haunted. And as he investigates the hauntings, he becomes enwrapped in a decades-old mystery involving the home's previous tenants. So as you can see, this film falls very much into the tradition of the classic haunted house films, such as The Haunting, The Innocents, and The Uninvited. And the director Peter Medak said that he was a huge fan specifically of The Haunting. Having read the script before it was even made, Medak said that he was actually able to visit the set while it was in production. And throughout the film, you can see he does a great job of evoking a very similar feeling in this film. He saw the film at its heart about a man dealing with grief who then starts to notice paranormal events happening around him. And in this way, it's also sort of reminiscent of the Nicholas Roeg film Don't Look Now, which is also about grieving parents, in this case Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, who lose their daughter and also travel to a new place, in their case Venice. And once there, they also notice strange things begin to happen. So it's an interesting theme of loss and grief that seems to run through these kinds of ghost stories. And for Peter Medak, this is actually what attracted him to the film more than the scares.
Mr. Russell.
And in fact, throughout the commentary track on the Blu-ray, both he and the producer Joel B. Michael said that they don't even like to consider this a horror film, as they feel the genre has kind of gone in a direction that is very different from this.
What we didn't want to do was make a ghost story that was going to be filled with blood and gore and guts in a slice and dice movie. And to Peter's credit and his talent, he remained true to the original intention, which resulted in what, in its own way, has become a kind of a classic ghost story.
Yeah, it's a psychological thing.
Especially around 1980 when this film was coming out, John Carpenter's Halloween really blew a lot of people away with how simple yet creative it was. But as things went on, horror became associated more with blood and killing than it was with, gothic ghost stories. So needless to say, the filmmakers behind The Changeling emphasized that they kind of consider this more of a psychological thriller with supernatural elements, which I suppose works. It definitely fits a bit better than if you were to describe it as an 80s horror film. But I think one of the things that I really like about the genre is that it has so many facets to it. True slashers, and I guess other more lowbrow films, if you want to call them that, can fall under the horror genre, as well as some of the most well-revered works of fiction like Frankenstein and Dracula. So while I get why they were making the distinction, I think you can pretty safely categorize this as a horror film. But that being said, I do think they made the right call in making the distinction during the process, because they definitely approach everything in this film as if it were real. The film is devoid of any kind of camp, with no jump scares or any kind of tropes that were becoming common in horror films. Also, having an A-list actor like George C. Scott really giving a committed performance definitely helps show that this is not your usual horror film of the day. And the fact that Medak chooses to focus more on the mystery and less on trying to meet a scare quota helps make the scenes that are scary that much more effective, as they come from something more real. So it's really no wonder why Martin Scorsese calls this one of the scariest movies ever made. And I also want to point out that the camera work in this film is fantastic. It was shot by John Cokion, who most famously worked with Sam Peckinpah on films like Straw Dogs. And he does a great job of creating this distinct look. Most of the film is shot in a pretty straightforward way, but as grounded as it is, when the supernatural things do start to happen, The camera work reflects this and becomes much more active with zooms and movement. And much like in The Haunting, it really becomes its own character, and most notably during and after the seance scene, it kind of drifts off and represents this ghostly presence. And I love that they choose to do these scenes handheld. The Steadicam technology to smooth out handheld shots was available and was famously used in The Shining and even earlier in this film when he's taking the tour of the house. But they specifically chose to shoot a lot of these scenes handheld, and keeping it handheld just gives it this grit and tension that they really wouldn't have gotten through Steadicam. So as I said, George C. Scott is in this film and he really does an incredible job. Depending on the film, Scott was known to be a pretty cranky actor to work with, being more invested in his theater career than his one in film. But both Medak and Joel B. Michael recalled Scott being great to work with, and they felt he was really excited to be working on this film.
It took about a week of shooting with George when he kept asking, why are you putting that lens and why are you on the floor and why are you doing this? And then he started looking dailies, and I had the most incredible experience with him.
The other big name on this film is two-time Oscar-winning actor Melvin Douglas, and he had actually won his second Oscar the year before in Hal Ashby's film Being There with Peter Sellers. He is of course great in this film and really plays an important role. A part in the story which I don't necessarily want to give away, but I'll just say he gives a great performance. Sadly, he actually died the following year in 1981, but watching this you can see he was still at the top of his game. So if you'd like to watch this film, you have several options. It's available to rent or buy from all the usual streaming sites, and it's frequently streaming on Shudder. And if you want to get the film physically, there is this very nice copy from, I believe, Severin Films. I haven't actually heard of them before I got this, but going through the disc and all the bonus features, it seems like they really did a great job. As you can see, it has a pretty cool reflective slipcover, and it also includes the soundtrack to the film by Rick Wilkins, which is pretty cool as well. So in short, it's a really cool disc that I can definitely recommend to any fans of the film. Alright, so for the question, I'm wondering, what is your favorite horror movie that's not really trying to be a horror movie? I know it sounds kind of weird, but just like how Peter Medak said that he tried to focus on telling the story and let the scares kind of come naturally from it, I'm curious if you have any favorite horror films that kind of do a similar thing. So if you can think of any, go ahead and put them down in the comments section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. Be sure to keep watching movies, and I'll see you next week.
What is it you want? What do you want from me? I've done everything I can do. There's nothing more to do.